it focuses on an issue that was important to them back when they started in 1986. So it goes like this. Beneath the nuclear umbrella, we're as safe as we can be. Our leaders are such pleasant fellas. They'll look out for you and me. We don't have to think about it. Our defense has been assured. What would we all do without it? Don't it make you feel secure? No. Ta-ra-ra, boom, die. We don't like war today. The bombs are now passé. They must be put away. Ta-ra-ra, boom, die. War doesn't work no more. It could go nuclear. Ta-ra-ra, boom.
Guns and bombs, nukes and tanks means lots of money in the bank for all those corporations too. Who foots the bill? It's me and you. Back in 1991, the Iron Curtain came crashing down. No more big bad enemy. No need for nukes and tanks, you see. All that cash ours to spend was known as the peace dividend. We'd use it for schools and health care. To be fair, the wealth to share. Environmental cleanup too. That bill was long overdue, but it was just a dream because government must have its wars. War on terror, war on drugs. The whole world thinks that we are thugs. Let's stop all this insanity and make the dream reality.
I want to welcome everyone. I guess there's not another song since it didn't pop up.
We'll do a couple more afterwards. The grannies bring us in and close us out.
Great. Yes. So Rowan has put together a PowerPoint with using some words that I had gathered from different places, and my name's Joan Goddard. So we're going to have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to talk along with it, in addition to us reading the slides.
We must not sleepwalk into a crisis of even greater proportions than the one we have experienced this year. These are the words of over 50 high-ranking officials from NATO states in an open letter calling on their governments to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Amid this pandemic, there has been hope. 4 countries have signed and 12 have ratified or acceded to the landmark Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We are at a pivotal moment. It is time for each and every member state of the United Nations, including nuclear-armed states, to be part of the solution.
Of course, you can't hear it. This is a banner to which we can add our local information wherever you all are. It's available, and Cheryl Spencer is on with us, and she can help with how you find that and so on, or you can get in touch with me. So I think we're ready for the next one. Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about the history later on, but right now we want to celebrate along with people all around the world celebrating today. There were some situations where there were live stream on the internet of starting at midnight or perhaps after it got light in countries around the world, as the time zones let the light shine or the midnight come or whatever, people were celebrating the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons entering into force today. And the timing is interesting because the first United Nations meetings that were official meetings where they took action other than saying we are now the United Nations were 90 days after that date, which was something like January 24th. But for some reason, January 22nd is 90 days after the 50th country, which are called states in the United Nations, signed and ratified, indicated that they had ratified, filled out the forms, signed it, and so on, that they had ratified within their structure the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So then 90 days after October 24th, which was a celebratory 75th anniversary of the United Nations, which had its very first resolution, number one was to get rid of nuclear weapons. And that was in 1945, which was several months after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. So the second sentence here is about the unfortunate activity to try to stop the treaty's progress. And that was especially true in the last 4 years, but also even President Obama did, and his administration did some discouragement of the development and the activity around the treaty. So I think we're ready to go to the next slide. When they talk about the other weapons of mass destruction, they're talking about landmines and cluster bombs and bio weapons. I'm sorry, I don't have that word down very well, which the United States also has not signed on to some of those treaties, but nevertheless, there have been effects of them in the United States, which is good. So the way this, we'll talk some more in the history, which is coming up, but first we want to see the names next of the, Rowan, we're ready for the next slide with the names of the countries that had ratified it as of October. And 2 more countries have now signed on as having ratified it. And but it doesn't take effect in those countries until 90 days after they have signed that they have ratified, got all these timely things and so on. So I think one of them was fairly soon after October 24th, and that one will be added soon. And I don't have the names of those 2 countries, unfortunately. I read a lot of things and made a lot of notes, but I didn't come across that. So, and I don't know when the 52nd one did, but 86 countries have signed on. So and it takes a long time in some countries to ratify treaties. Everybody see your favorite countries in the list, as well as some new ones. Cheryl had the information that Honduras was the 50th, and Cambodia now has signed, and also some other country, because Honduras is in this list of the first 50. It was the one, Honduras, it turned in its ratification information on October 24th, sort of knowing that that was the anniversary, the 75th anniversary. So and that it was the 50th. Okay, I think everybody's had a chance to see that. And now you can see in living color here, the green is the countries that have ratified. And it probably does not include the last 2. And the yellow are the countries that signed the treaty almost all of them in September of 2017. And then others will be signing and ratifying, and more of the 86 will be ratifying also. So it's quite obvious where the empty places are, that are the gray places, shall we say. Looks like South America is doing pretty well, except for Argentina. Australia's over there, and look at little New Zealand down in the lower right of the image here. They're doing a really, really good job in New Zealand on this. Several other things they've done very well. And then there's North America, unless you count Mexico as part of North America, but let's say Mexico and the rest south from there, almost all. You can't even see any gray there, can you? But there probably is some gray. But the Canada and the United States have not signed, even though Canada does not, as far as I know, does not have nuclear weapons. And lots of Asia has not signed, and lots of Europe because of NATO. So back in the 60s, the UN developed the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. And many countries have signed it. I think about almost 100 countries signed it. And the US and Russia did cut back on the nuclear weapons. But of course, when you have 1,500 or so of them, it's hard to believe that it makes a big difference from however many we had before that. And since then, since they did some progress, it's been extremely slow and inactive, basically, on getting rid of nuclear weapons, which is one of the things that the Non-Proliferation Treaty covered, even though it's not in the name. The other thing that has happened is that many more countries, 7 more countries, including Israel, which doesn't, quote, admit to having nuclear weapons, but it's clear that they do. So since 1970, more countries now have nuclear weapons than did then. And that doesn't sound like non-proliferation to me. Maybe the countries that had a lot, like then the USSR and the United States, have fewer, but it's still ridiculously horrible. So in around 2007, 2008, some people were together, people who were involved with the United Nations, including, I saw today a program that, heard a program actually, and saw a film that we can look at sometime too, that included Ray Atchison, who is in the WILPF office, or part of the structure of international WILPF, which includes the group she works with, Reaching Critical Will, which is reaching critical will for getting rid of nuclear weapons, and maybe some other things too. And she said that some people who go to the United Nations programs and meetings and so on were, talking and saying how frustrating it was about the treaty on the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And they said this was like 35 years after that had been ratified. And they had been having meetings, I think, every 2 years, and then they changed every 5 years. And the last one got postponed, but it's supposed to be coming up in the fall of this year, which is about 1.5 years after it would have been, except for the pandemic. And they said, what can we do? So they decided to work on it. And basically, the rest of this information is what they did. In 2016, they had, in the summertime, they had 3 large meetings that I had listed here, but I took it out because it was taking up too much space. Where they had, quote, a working group that developed some concepts and shared them and so on and so forth. And then in the fall, they voted, the United Nations General Assembly voted to actually have meetings in the spring of 2017 to develop and negotiate among the countries who were willing to be involved to set up the treaty on the TPNW. They've started meeting in March of 2017. That's another thing I took out. And they met, I remember they had the meetings available. They were the public parts of the meetings, relatively speaking, the active parts, and I suppose people worked on it in the meantime. There were other organizations besides ICANN and the Red Cross and the several other groups were also there at those meetings, including one or more Hibakusha survivors of either Hiroshima or Nagasaki bombings. And the civil society groups, they're called, and individuals who are not officially representing any countries were sometimes able to talk also, and they had meetings outside of the general meetings and worked on things and wrote papers and did all sorts of work to help with getting the wording for the treaty developed. And then there was, and one of the things that they mentioned in the film that they were showing for Philadelphia, but thanks to Zoom, I got to see it and other people did too this afternoon. One of the things they mentioned especially was the number of women who were involved. They mentioned the chair of the meetings in 2017 in the spring was an official from, I think she was prime minister, but maybe a different title, from Costa Rica. And on what they showed on the film included her talking about the fact that Costa Rica had gotten rid of weapons and military quite early on. And so that was symbolically good, as well as for other reasons. I'm sure that she was chosen to chair the meetings, and then they had one or two other people who chaired part-time, so she had a break sometimes. The woman who represented Ireland was quite involved, very much involved. And several other women were there. There may have been more men than women, but there were a significant number of women, not just tokens or whatever you want to call it. And the civil society groups in several cases were like ICANN and various others were significantly represented by women as well. So they after they had been meeting for a while and doing a lot of work and written materials and so on, I don't know whether it was the woman from Costa Rica or another woman. We'll have to look that up so we get clear about who it was who, probably with a small group, worked on the text then and shared it in June of 2017 with the people who were still there, ready to look it over and see if there were any changes needed with the draft before the vote, which, as it says here, was on July 7th of 2017. I think that there were 135 states, countries, also the Vatican, who were in the room when they were voting. And 122 of them voted to approve it. Benin, Charles told us what the 51st state was. Great, thank you. So on July 7th of 2017, the vote was taken, and it was not apparently what is considered to be an official General Assembly meeting of the United Nations. So some people say that it's not a United Nations treaty, but hopefully they will rectify that before long. And in any case, all the work was done in connection with the United Nations and by representatives of United Nations members countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, not technically a United Nations treaty, but it is basically a United Nations treaty. So then this also took out the information about the September 20th is a special recognition day, International Day at the United Nations. And that's the date when they opened the signing ceremonies. 86, as many as 86, possibly a few less, countries officially signed it. But that's not the same as ratifying it. So then they had to work on all their individual countries' ratification methods. And they went through that process, and some were able to do it fairly quickly. But as we now know, it took until October 24th of 2020 for the 50th ratification to be recorded. We don't know when Honduras actually finished their vote and said, oh, let's wait till the anniversary of the founding, the first official meetings of the UN. So that was great. And then they had the 90-day time period after the 24th before the treaty entered into force today. As I said, there's lots and lots of information around. There are several websites that have a lot of information. One of them is the ICANN. It's ICANNW. It's the International Committee on Against Nuclear Weapons. .org has quite a bit of information, of course. And there's also an organization called Nuclear Ban, B as in boy, A-N, like we're banning the bomb, nuclearban.us. And they have a lot of information also on their website. They've been doing a lot of lobbying and working with people all around the United States and the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. Yes, I always have trouble with what the C is. I'm gonna have to get better at that. Thanks, Cheryl.
I have a question.
Great.
The yellows is the ones that the country approved it, but they haven't ratified it.
No, they've signed it.
They've signed it. I mean,
somebody
yeah.
has enough authority to be able to sign it.
Uh-huh.
Often the head of the government, but not always, probably.
Yeah.
And the
Okay.
green ones are the 50, and maybe, I don't know that particular map includes the 51st and 52nd, but at least it includes the 50 that have actually ratified it and recorded their ratification information with the United Nations. Cheryl? Yes, very good point, Cheryl. Over 600 organizations are associated with ICANN. And they said at some point that they set it up partly to attract young people. And that was very evident during the negotiations during that 2017, those sessions that I and some of the rest of you got to see. It was very clear. And there's a lot of like outdoor activity and, partly celebration of the work that was getting done and partly information and so on and so forth. And then after the vote, there was at least one big demonstration in New York City as well. So that was cool. So we're getting now to the troubling part of this. the US government, as we said at the beginning, was negative about it. And it's not just Trump, it was also the Obama administration. And they did a lot of negative things, including a session that maybe some of you saw, where it may have been the very first session when they were starting in March of 2017, when they were starting to negotiate. That was when Nikki Haley was the US ambassador to the UN. And she had a press conference, and they managed to get some of the other NATO, I think they were mostly NATO countries rather than necessarily, well, France was there. Yeah, there were maybe 5 or 6 people with her, and they set up this press conference outside the room where the negotiations session, where the sessions were going to start working on the wording for this treaty. And of course, she was very negative and had all sorts of strange things to say and so on and so forth. So that was, you know, not a very proud moment for many of us who live in the United States, to say the least. Then another thing, and the US didn't have anybody go to the meetings, and some of the other nuclear powers, there they say, also didn't have people go to the meetings. And sometimes there were some NATO countries who were in the meetings and were not among the 122 who signed it, who voted for it in July of 2017. Then this opposition letters to ratifying countries. In October, when it looked as if it was very likely that the 50th country was going to be indicating their ratification, the United States, otherwise known as the Trump administration, sent letters to the countries that had ratified it. I don't know that they knew Honduras was going to be the 50th, but anyway, they sent it to probably at least 49 countries, saying, don't you want to pull out of this and de-ratify? So that was unusual, at least according to all the information that I've seen in the information on the treaty and the process and so on. One of the things that I wanted to be sure to say too at some point, and maybe this is a good time to say it, but it's when it's coming to my mind anyway, regardless. Nuclear weapons do not respect borders. That was one of the things that somebody said on that film that I saw this afternoon, that we will be getting the information about it. And also it was a Zoom program, and they had speakers from several organizations in Philadelphia who also spoke after the film. So there was a chat system for that, and they are planning to send that to us.
Small countries.
Good point. Yes. And it's not just Kazakhstan, which may not have a huge population, but it's quite large on that map with the green. And Mexico is quite large also. And some of the South American countries are also quite large in territory, at least. But the population, some of the smaller square miles countries have very dense populations too. So it's a whole mixture but people do say, well, the big countries haven't signed on, like Alex is pointing out. And that partly is because a lot of them are part of NATO. And partly, but some of the populous countries really have signed on too. So it's quite a mixture, but they do talk about, oh, that tiny little island out there in the Pacific signed on, big deal. Yeah, well, some of those islands in the Pacific were close to the Marshall Islands, where a lot of nuclear testing was done too. Probably
Yeah.
some fallout or whatever you want to call it, some drift. So they're very aware and
I have a
decide.
question. I have a
Yes.
question. Okay. So in the beginning, you were talking about the banning of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. I was wondering, where do drones fit in there?
I don't know that that there's been any discussion about drones in this particular in the information about this treaty. I don't know that there are treaties, but I'm going to write down drones ? So that we can find out about that, because obviously they are a problem. Great, thanks, Karen. Unless anybody else has any information.
Yes, currently nuclear weapons cannot be delivered by drones.
Technically, is that a technical thing?
Yes, it doesn't mention, I don't think the articles mention drones in particular. They tend to deliver different kinds of weapons.
Okay, Cheryl, I think we have plenty of time. Can you go back to the previous one? And I got a copy of it here, but maybe everybody else wants to double check to be sure they didn't have any other questions about the US government. Right. One of the things that we wanted to express some of the positive aspects about the US government reaction also.
Judy said she thinks you've missed the word free. In the third bullet, Biden as a candidate expressed US responsibility to lead for a nuclear free, we're guessing. Did he mean?
Oh, not a nuclear weapon world. That's my typo. I'm sorry.
Yes, for a nuclear free weapon.
This was one of the last slides that Rowan and I prepared, and I had a typo. Thank you, Judy and Cheryl. So we'll fix that. Right, a nuclear weapons free world, it should say. Yes, I know it's a singular, nuclear weapon free world. I noticed that. But apparently Biden had even back in 2004, he said something that was good. I don't have that right in front of me, but he did say something that long ago. And then last summer or spring, when he was a candidate for the president, I think it was around the early August Hiroshima and Nagasaki anniversary, 75th anniversary also, expressed, there's a quote from him about US responsibility should be leading for a nuclear weapons free world.
Are you asking about the immediate steps, that fourth bullet?
Yes.
Yes, you could actually, a nuclear weapon holding country could actually join the TPNW, and then they have a certain amount of time to get rid of their weapons. So, there are countries that host nuclear weapons on behalf of the US. So Turkey has some, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So they could arrange to have them removed, and then, they could say, we want to join the TPNW, and then they'll have so many, I forget what the number of months is to actually get rid of them. So don't let anybody say, well, they can't join it because they've got the weapons. They could, as long as they committed to get rid of them within a certain time frame. That's all.
Right, and with Biden as president, if he speaks up in some of the ways that he has spoken up before, it might be possible that some of those countries that have US nuclear weapons would actually talk with the administration and Biden and do that. So that would be great. Probably wouldn't have happened a year ago, but it's great. And there also are things that can be done that you have time after you ratify it also. The full text of the treaty is about 10 pages it's 10 pages plus a couple lines on the nuclearbanus.us, nuclearban.us website. And of course, it's in a lot of other places too, including the United Nations website. But the nuclearban.us website is an easy, it's not as loaded with information and pages as the UN is. And so it's easier to tell you that that's a place where you can find it. There are about, I don't know, 3 or 4 pages of whereases. I think it's like, yeah, it's two plus almost 3 pages of whereas kinds of things, which are very important to read. And then there are, 7 pages of details, including the kinds of things we were just talking about. And one of the things that we mentioned early in this PowerPoint is the whole question of people who were harmed by both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, which was many people who survived, as well as all the ones who didn't. And also, last summer, we heard from, thanks to WILPF Disarm Committee, we heard from the people in New Mexico whose families and they themselves as very young children were harmed by the 1940s testing of atomic weapons, materials, etc. And they're called downwinders, one word, downwind from the explosion. And they were not told that they should go away or that there might be some danger or lots of other aspects like that. So the people in Nevada, where so much testing has been done, do have some compensation system that the US government has, but it does not include the downwinders and their families and descendants. So that's something that people are working on and that we heard more about last summer and can learn more about as well.
Yeah, there are downwinders in Nevada. Anybody who lives downwind from nuclear testing is called a downwinder.
Okay.
Not just the people in New Mexico, but the people in Nevada and all those people who suffered in the Marshall Islands and the French Polynesian Islands where they set them off. So
right.
So there's organizations who represent these downwinders.
But
I had a comment when I was coming back from another demonstration after our demonstration for the treaty at noon today. And that was a discussion with a high-level person from the U.S. Institute of Peace. And he was asked by the news person, what isn't covered? And he said, well, there's a whole lot of weapons under development, hyper speed and, that will not be covered by this treaty. And that lack of inclusion of the new arsenal of weapons, which I won't mention the previous president's name, put out for development, and that's one issue that nuclear disarmament folks need to work on. Weapons that have not yet been developed, you may be able to, I don't think he mentioned this, but you may be able to in the near future, if those weapons development plans are not stopped, that you can have a small nuclear weapon carried on a drone, I would imagine.
So he was talking about nuclear weapons.
Yes,
then.
yes.
Yeah. As well as all sorts of other stuff probably too, but
yes, yeah.
Right, the small ones, that's, yep.
Although some people say if it's that small, it's really not worth it because you can use just a regular.
Well, you could poison a good number of people. Yeah, I know what you mean though. It is worth it. The smaller ones are insidious and probably easy, possibly easier for terrorists to get a hold of.
Terrorists, yes, the
Yeah.
terrorists are always an issue.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you, Mercy. Yeah, so that kind of brings us to the last slide, I think, which is what do we do now? The future. And in case you can't read the information about that big tall building with the blue lettering on it, that's the United Nations, one of the United Nations buildings in New York City. And it's got a lighted sign that talks about the TPNW. I can't read it, but it's pretty nifty, especially if you're there or if you get to where you maybe get a magnifying glass for the picture. That picture may show up in various places. So the question is, what do we do next? And that tiny URL there will take you to, what is it, 5 or 6 pages, Cheryl, of sample letters, media releases, letters to the editor, lawn signs, banners, and various other documents that are very useful. And we want to get together and use them. You can use them tonight if you want to. A lot of them refer to this date. So if you don't use them tonight or fairly soon, you'll probably want to revise them a little bit, but they're things that will be valuable to use over a period of time, I'm sure. And my theory is that I want to really, really get going on this in terms of actually doing things with legislators when I can go to visit them or go to a city council meeting. There are lots of cities in the Santa Clara County and nearby, and Los Angeles and other places where you all live. So what we want to do is to let you sign up. I should have been writing down everybody's names who was on this call, but basically I'm going to be sending out messages to everybody. I sent out messages about this call tonight and asking if you, hoping that that they got a chance, other people got a chance to learn about this today or in the near future or recent past, and that we will be communicating about what we're going to do next and so on. Obviously, the sign up to meet with the legislators refers here to HR 2419, which may not have the same number in the new Congress, but it is not the only activity, especially at the state level and local levels. We would be talking primarily, excuse me, about the TPNW. But it is true that HR 2419 is very significant. It is a bill that has developed somewhat in the last few years, but it's also been introduced in, I don't know, 15 sessions of Congress, maybe not quite that many. In around the mid 1990s, it was the subject of a Proposition 1. And we have the information, Proposition 1, Prop 1, excuse me, PROP1, the number 1.org is the website where you can find out more about it. It was a proposition in the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. that was put forth by people who had a vigil at the White House 24/7, and also obviously others who joined them off and on, and some people stayed there the whole time, including one of our WILPF Disarm Committee chairs, Ellen Thomas, who keeps track of the prop1.org website and also has met with Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's been the longtime representative of DC in the Congress. it's going to be reintroduced. Some members of Congress signed on last year as supporting it, and they're all being asked if they would want to be among the original sponsors, co-sponsors, etc. So that particular bill, you can look it up on congress.org. I'm sorry, .gov, congress.gov. That particular bill will probably be almost the same this coming year. That seems to be the plan. And it now includes not only nuclear weapons, but also positive things like using the money for climate related issues.
I wanted to,
yes,
if I may, I wanted to mention some things that could be done immediately. A little while ago, I sent to our branch a letter. I, at this point, can't remember the organization that put the draft out. It was a draft that you could just sign. It was at that time addressed to the President-elect, Joe Biden. I got busy with our event that we did today and didn't sign it, didn't send it off after signing it. So I suggested to our members that they just modify and make it to President Biden. I crossed out elect and said, yay. The second thing I wanted to mention is that I had volunteered early to get a contact project going with the Congressional Progressive Caucus, our California members at least, to encourage them in Congress to work on the treaty issue. And I guess I also wanted to give Ellen Thomas credit for working on Prop 1. She's been a marvelous worker for disarmament. So I can send a copy of the letter that I received that you could look at. It congratulates him as being elected as president. It mentions the nuclear ban treaty coming to maturity 2 days later. And it encourages him to work for our survival by supporting the treaty.
And this example is in resource guide number 3 of the 4 resource guides that were sent to all the branches, and Joan has sent them on to your branch. It's all the example is in there.
Yeah, and we also got, our branch got individually from the organizing group that information. So you've got 2 reasons to do that.
And what the mention of the resource guides reminds me to let you all know that the WILPFus.org website has, down at the bottom of most of the pages, or at least the home page, has e-alert archives and e-news archives. And there are articles about the treaty and including information about and links to the resource guides, which Cheryl just mentioned, that you can get to from the December and January e-news, and the December e-news and the January 18th e-alert. And they have the articles and the article in the December one talks about the HR 2419, as well as the TPNW. And the Cheryl did the resource guide references and information for the e-alert from January 18th. So this is the kind of thing that I will put in emails to invite other members who weren't able to be with us tonight, as well as you all, to communicate about this. And I don't know whether we want to say that we'll have a, well, first I want to say that we've mentioned right here on this slide, the last item here, this is the last slide, by the way, that we mentioned HR 2419 because it's a specific bill that we know will be reintroduced, and that's a way to have discussion about the issues that are involved with the TPNW. But we will be specifically also writing to our local people and representatives and members of Congress and so on, California legislators and so on, because all of them can take positions on the TPNW specifically. And so that's not mentioned here in this particular item, but it's definitely something that we'll be focusing on in addition to the federal bill, which we would not be writing so much to the local people about, or the state people. But what we want to do is to work together and use some of the materials that Cheryl and the committee have put together and share those and talk with people who are not with us tonight and see what we can do and listen to and hear about what's being done by the Palo Alto Peninsula Group, Peninsula Palo Alto Group of WILPF, and also others around the state and the country, and inspire each other and energize each other and so on. So we will definitely be in touch. And I don't want to close this out now, but I did want to be sure to mention those things before we see if other people have things to either share or ask about or whatever.
Right, so I put in the chat, the whitehouse.gov is now owned by the Biden administration. And if you go there and search about, you will see send an email to the president, which you have to do, you know, they have a form you fill in. So you have to copy and paste from the text of the suggested letter from one of those resource guides. You copy and paste it into a window on that. It's a form. And also he now owns the handle on Twitter of POTUS, P-O-T-U-S. So earlier this morning, I tweeted to @POTUS to tell him about the TPNW, and he better pay attention to it. So as soon as he became President Biden, all these websites and Twitter accounts folded over to the Biden administration. And the nuclear codes. As you know, currently the president of the US has sole authority to decide that nuclear weapons should be fired towards an enemy. And that's a sore point that Nancy Pelosi, as you might have read in the paper, got really worried when she realized that we had this 2 more weeks of a deranged megalomaniac who you know, she thought, my God, he could try and set off a nuclear weapon as his last act. So there are people to get the rules changed about who has authority to say that nuclear weapons should be set off. Unfortunately, there's not much time. If an enemy really does direct a nuclear missile towards us, there's about 20 minutes to half an hour that you have to decide what you're going to do about it. So you're not going to convene Congress and get authority in that time. So there are people looking at this, but not allowing the president just themselves to decide, maybe having a high-level committee or something. So these are a lot of things that are, you know, all the things that are going on to do with nuclear weapons that are not just to do with the TPNW, but nuclear weapons in general.
And we might not be lucky enough
anyway,
to have a person in charge like the man in the movie, which is a true story, the
right,
man who saved the world.
Right. A Russian captain who was in charge of the control room where they were monitoring with radar back in the 70s I believe, what was going on, because they're continually looking for missiles, and through some glitch, they got a warning that there was, at least one missile coming towards the USSR from, apparently from America, from the US, and but he knew that hadn't been there wasn't a particularly high level disagreement going on in that period, more than in the kind of the background disagreements. And so he decided that he would not allow, although all the systems told him he should fire off some missiles, he decided not to. And a few minutes later, he was proven right that it was something wrong with the radar. The radar, was not as sophisticated then. Anyway, so they did not fire any weapons. And that's a true story. And now it's a kind of a documentary and a drama all in one. So this man is now well into his 70s. So an organization brought him to New York to thank him for doing this, and interviewed him. So they've got an actor who, they've set up what looks like a Russian control room, radar screens of that era, and the actor acting him. But then you actually get to see the real man, who lives in a little flat in, some part of Russia now, and hasn't been really fettered in America, in the US, in Russia, but he was brought here and given some certificate or something from the UN in a UN ceremony. It's a very nice film.
Yeah, the thing that this brings to mind for me is a graphic that we didn't share tonight, but I'll send it with an email to you all some sooner or later. It's something that I think the WILPF folks in Burlington, Vermont shared with us, which is that one Trident submarine has, I think it's 24 missiles, anyways, 24 bombs.
Now, 24 missiles, and each missile has
3 bombs on each
multiple,
one. Right.
more than
what
3.
they show in this graphic is that they show all of these taking off, and they show the pathway to all these different 72 cities in the USSR, formerly now Russia.
So yes, and the Trident submarines are out there in in the deep water. We're not supposed to know where they are, and they'd be very difficult to call. You can't call back a nuclear missile once it's been set off.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. Yes, right. Yep. So I'm thinking about, because it's, I mean, you hate to go back to kids ducking under desks, but then the problem with that was supposedly going to save them, but it also gave them had let them think about nuclear bombs to a certain extent. But at least high school students should be getting the information and participating in work along this line.
Right. They have youth ambassadors, things like that, these different organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, there are, as I said, nearly 600 organizations that are part of the ICANN, under the ICANN umbrella, who've been helping and along the way and taking part. And they're all over the world. And then, so don't feel that we're the only people working on it.
Right.
Lots of people working on it, yes.
And definitely not the only people in the United States either.
Oh, not
so
at
we'll
all.
be hearing from WILPF people, but there are also many other organizations in the US that are working on it.
Yes.
And we haven't mentioned move the money and don't bank on the bomb, and
right.
Retirement system money, etc., etc.
Right. So we're going to have some resource guides. People are preparing more guides on that point of approach in trying to get people to divest from their mutual funds, having money invested in Lockheed Martin or Raytheon. So there are efforts going on divestment, and some pension plans are already pulling out of of investing their pension plan in such companies. And somewhere I saw a list of pension plans. I'm talking of big institutions who've decided to not allow their money to buy stock of certain. It's about 24 companies you want to avoid. So a lot of the demonstrations today were outside nuclear weapons manufacturing companies such as Raytheon, Lockheed, Honeywell. Those are the kind of the three big ones, and Boeing. I don't know if anybody was outside any Boeing place, but that's.
And some of those companies have factories or other products that they have factories for in countries that have signed this treaty.
Right.
So that'll be an interesting process too.
Right. So there's assistance. Well, there's you're not supposed to assist any other country from having anything to do with nuclear weapons. So that remains. Ireland is a good example of whether they're going to. They actually have a law. When you ratify this treaty, you make domestic laws that explain how your country will follow the treaty. And it's usually by making new laws in your own country. And Ireland has already passed their laws. They were one of the first countries to ratify it. And so they have some domestic laws that say if they do find that you're doing something to do with nuclear weapons, they may fine you like €500,000, or they may send you to jail. So we're waiting to see if they try to, the question is if the head of Lockheed Martin should fly through Shannon Airport on his way someplace, might they arrest him because his company makes nuclear weapons? So, in as much as Pinochet went to visit somebody in Spain, and he was wanted for crimes in Chile, and he was arrested in Spain and extradited to some other country that then tried him, and then he died before they got very far. But that's the kind of thing that we imagine might happen with this treaty.
Right. And I mentioned the woman from Ireland who was so involved in working on the treaty and developing it and so on. So we know there are folks there who are doing a thorough and early job on it.
Right.
As well as other countries.
Yes.
You mentioned Honeywell, and that was one of the things that reminded me to.
Right. Well, Honeywell makes a lot of other things,
Yes.
especially air conditioners and medical equipment and medical diagnostics and things like that. And so they're in over 100 countries. Honeywell has offices in over 100 countries, of which, maybe 20 of them have already signed this treaty. So the question is, are they going to let Honeywell, or not doing their nuclear weapons work in that country, but somewhere in Honeywell, somebody's doing something to do with nuclear weapons. So these are remain to be seen if
right.
those aspects of the treaty are brought to bear.
And the whole thing about, well, we make air conditioners in your country, but it still gives a chance to talk about it, and the country can also consider making a law about it, as you were saying. And it's an extremely extremely dangerous thing to have in this world. And so anything that people can do to get that across to people who know that we haven't, well, we have had accidents, but we haven't had a total catastrophe yet.
Yet.
Nuclear ban, US has a great list of companies, boycottable countries that make consumer products that we all, if we have any investments, should look through our portfolio and remove them and get press. We can always write articles and letters to the editor, and moreover, contact columnists who may promote some of these ideas to boycott.
Right. And as Cheryl said, we're going to be getting more information from folks who've been working on the next batch of
Guides.
Right. Resource guides.
Right. It's going to be a few weeks.
I raised my hand. I also suggest that people in branches renew a campaign to get their cities to join Mayors for Peace. We succeeded, the efforts of two of us, to get the city of East Palo Alto and Menlo Park to sign up. And part of that is to follow up on their agreement to work for a nuclear-free world. And it's one thing that you can do. I'm hoping to renew a campaign for other peninsula cities to do the same, so that the city, and of course, the state of California has been pretty progressive in its support for issues like this, but get your city to join that. The city council meetings, you can discuss the issue and propose it and give information. Jackie Cabasso will give you great information. She represents Mayors for Peace in the United States. And when you go to a city council, most city councils, I think all city councils must record. I don't know how many people follow those recordings, but you can get press. You can get press, and those two cities that we got issued a proclamation that they would work for a nuclear-free world. So that brings public opinion into the picture.
Right. And so ICANN has a similar thing. They call it the ICANN Cities Appeal.
Yes,
and they've also got cities to sign on to that. I haven't actually looked at it, but I presume it's similar.
Yeah, that's a very good alternative.
Yeah. The city is saying specifically that they support the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons.
Right, and that is the most timely, I guess. Yeah.
Right. You could look at both and see which might suit your city the best.
Right, and we can work on both the Mayors for Peace level and also the rest of the city council at the same time, and let that reinforce each other.
Right.
Maybe I can say something.
Great, Sharat.
Yeah, this is Sharat Lynn. First of all, I want to thank you for holding this program. I learned quite a bit from the presentation, so thank you, and thank you for WILPF's continuing activism. I just wanted to make one comment about the small nuclear weapons. So the issue with the small nuclear weapons is that these are generally used as tactical nuclear weapons, and the United States has for the most part not really invested in tactical nuclear weapons, but from time to time there's always the talk of, well, we should develop small nuclear weapons for use and for tactical purposes. The significance of the tactical nuclear weapons is that countries, there is a country, for example, like Pakistan, that has actually made tactical nuclear weapons. And the reason for that is because if it were to go into a war with India, India is a much larger country with a much larger nuclear arsenal and also a much larger conventional armed forces. So if we were to fight a war with India and India did not use its nuclear weapons, Pakistan would make the decision to use its tactical nuclear weapons first in order to balance the power of India. So that's one of the dangers of tactical nuclear weapons, is the possibility of first use. The other thing I wanted to suggest is, you know, that going back to the Obama administration, it was under Obama that the decision was made to initiate a program of upgrading of the US nuclear arsenal. And the amount that was set forth, you know, projecting forward for, it's a plan, it's not a budget, but it's a plan for the next 30 years, was to spend an additional $1 trillion over 30 years to upgrade the US nuclear arsenal. So I think, you know, Biden may be a little more receptive to you know, at least reducing the nuclear threat, and so I think this is one campaign that we should launch to try to cancel that upgradation of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, and
Right.
disable, and particularly now, because so much money has been needed for COVID relief. We need that money.
We need it. It's the same amount. It's
Yeah.
now gone up to 1.3 trillion over 30 years.
Mm.
And so that could be used, you know, just take it and use it for this, the package that the Democrats are trying to get through Congress right now.
Yeah. Another thing is working on the no first strike, trying to get the not have this country or a lot of countries do first strike nuclear weapons.
Right. Well, somebody wants to pass a bill through the Congress that the US says it will never be the first one to set off a nuclear weapon. Apparently China has said that. China's the only one of the 9 who've made that commitment. So there are some people in our Congress right now working on a bill that's, you know, what would say that.
Mm-hmm.
WILPF is not supportive technically of Back from the Brink, but Back from the Brink does start out, you know, WILPF traditionally is no nuclear weapons. Back from the Brink has done maybe a less strong approach, but they've, I think, wisely also considered that that's a first step. And sometimes you can get people to the ultimate goal better if you give them a first step. So I did, not as a WILPF member, but independently as a Menlo Park member and a friend of Atherton. 2 of us got the city of Atherton to sign Back from the Brink. So that's a gradualist step that WILPF is not interested in endorsing, but it sometimes is the way to get a city that won't go for complete nuclear disarmament, to get them at least into the debate.
So I hope that all of you will talk with friends and relatives, write emails, find the other people who would rather not have to think about this, but know they really should and are willing to join with us and do some either individual work or later on some group work, get organized. find the other organizations in our county, like the San Jose Peace and Justice Center groups and others. And so let's exchange some emails. I don't know whether you all have my email address. I think most of you do. It's a simple one, so I'll give it to you. It's Joan, Joan, at Rujo, RUJO.org. Thank you for all of the information and discussion. And is there anybody else who would like to contribute something tonight, as well as by email? If not, we have another short, slightly longer, but good short film to show you. And this one doesn't have anyone talking. It has some music, which if it's
Yes, it is. I made a number of them. This one is in plastic because we held it out at our rainy vigil today from noon to 1:30. And if you've done a banner with the QR code, people can, during COVID, a safe distance away, 6 feet or further, can photograph this and go directly to the I think it's listed on Action Network, basically the WILPF petition supporting the TPNW. So.
And I keep going to that website to see how the numbers are going. So I think we've gained about 5 people today.
Yeah, and I've been slowly, laboriously transferring the signatures, the print signatures of our print petitions, so that we can add those people to our contacts to do things where they live to support the treaty. There are quite a few still pending in 2020, and if anybody uses Excel, I'm sure that Ellen Thomas would be happy to have help. I certainly would have that happiness. It's a lot of eye strain because people never print, even though the treaty petition says print in large print, it says print. So a lot of the names, I don't know, I'm not sure what that person's name is, but it's a good source. And I believe Alan used the signatures that I had done up to that point for outreach for Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Nagasaki's 75th anniversary. So I don't think there's going to be that problem, of course, with the online petitions, but we still have paper ones out there. And hope your branch, other branches that are on this call will at least do that. Send them on to Ellen after you've finished.
Yeah, from the prop1.org has the petitions, the blank petitions that Judy's talking about. And as you said, the online ones can be done when we're not out and about, as well as when we are out and about.
Thank you for, it's probably on the Prop 1.
Yeah. Okay. Are we ready for the send-off song, or anybody else have anything to contribute or ask? And everybody save the chat.
What's the music? The Old
Rosin the Bow or Acre of Clams. Both of those tunes are, this is a song that in the 70s we sang at pretty much every nuke plant in the US that I have updated for our branch. You can find various versions of it on YouTube, including one with Arlo Guthrie singing, I think, the Hanford version. But I spent the 70s getting arrested at nuke plants, and this song just stuck in my head for years, and so I updated it for our branch.
And thank you for your work then, and thank you for your work tonight and all day today.
Thank you. Oh, now finding the right note. I've lived all my life in this country. I've known every flower and tree. I'm going to live here till I'm 90. It's the nukes that must go and not me. It's the nukes that must go and not me, my friend. The nukes that must go and not me. I'm going to live here till I'm 90. It's the nukes that must go and not me. We've swallowed enough radiation. It's time we were setting our ground. So join in the grand occupation. We're shutting all power plants down. We're shutting all power plants down. We're shutting all power plants down. Come join in that grand occupation. We're shutting all power plants down. In Fukushima, the children have cancer. In Chernobyl, they can't till the land. Why sit home and wait for a meltdown? Come fight for your freedom and land. Come fight for your freedom and land. Come fight for your freedom and land. Come sit home and wait for a meltdown. Come fight for your freedom and land. No more fuel to poison our earth home. We're going to clean up our land. No enrichment to put into more bombs. We're stopping that cycle right now. We're stopping that cycle right now. We're stopping that cycle right now. No enrichment to put into more bombs. We're stopping that cycle right now.
Ooh, yes.
So everybody knows this one. Just sing along. There's a new verse right here, when all the nukes are gone from Earth. So that's just our next to the one. When we make peace instead of war, when we make peace instead of war, how I want to be in that number. When we make peace instead of war, when all the nukes are gone from Earth, when all the nukes are gone from Earth, how I want to be in the number when all the nukes are gone from Earth. when Congress speaks for you and me, when Congress speaks for you and me. How I want to be in that number when Congress speaks for you and me. When we make peace instead of war, when we make peace instead of war. How I want to be in that number when we make peace instead of war.
So take us out, Joan. Say goodbye.
Okay, everybody get one more chance at saving the chat. And we'll be in touch, but do write to me if you want to, joan@rujo.org. And let us know. I can let people know what everybody's been doing this weekend.
Okay.
Thank you, Rowan. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.